So we can hear the war drums beating louder in Syria again. Donald Trump said there's active preparation for a new chemical attack in Syria by Assad. But this seems to be just a rumour. There's not really any evidence for it. There's not really any intelligence for it that we can see. But of course, now that he's said that, there's nothing to stop the rebels doing a chemical attack and blaming that on Assad, which is what happens quite a lot. We can see that Michael Fallon, our Secretary of State for Defence, he's there, he's raring to go. He wants to be in there with the Americans if the Americans go in. But we can see that in 2013, the British Parliament, for the first time in a few hundred years, voted to not bomb somebody. They voted not to bomb Assad. And because we, the British, wouldn't bomb Assad, that meant the Americans had no cover, really. They couldn't really do it on their own or with just a few little allies. So basically, our Parliament voting no stopped the Americans bombing Assad in 2013, which is very good and shows how much power we've actually got there. But at the moment, even Emmanuel Macron, the new president of France, is saying that he's not really interested. He wants a diplomatic solution for the Syrian civil war. So if he's not going to do it and we're not going to do it, that means that probably the Americans can't do it either. So we need to make sure that our Parliament votes in the right way for that. And also in 2003, in the Iraq War, if Tony Blair hadn't been standing shoulder to shoulder with the Americans probably wouldn't have gone into Iraq either. So we need to understand how much power we've got, and we need to make sure that we're on the right side here. There's no real evidence that Assad's ever used chemical weapons against anybody. In the 2013 Ghouta attack, the UN sent a special envoy, Carla Del Ponte, to Ghouta to investigate the attacks, and when she came back, her report stated that if anybody had used chemical weapons, then actually it was the rebels and not Assad. That didn't stop them trying to blame it on Assad. That kind of report can be hidden quite easily. Particularly, all they've got to do is hide it from us, the populations, and they can do that very easily by not reporting it in the mainstream media. So this upset the UN a little bit. It wasn't the answer they were looking for. So when in April this year there was another chemical attack in Khan Shaykhun, the UN didn't send anybody to investigate. That didn't stop them blaming it on Assad. But they did that on hearsay, and what little evidence they did have was given to them by the rebels. So you decide whether that's reliable evidence or not. The fact is that Assad's actually winning this war at the moment. He's very close to winning this war with the help of his Russian friends. And at the moment, the only way he could possibly lose this war, it would seem, would be to actually conduct a chemical weapons attack on his population, and that would give the Americans and the Brits and the opening we need to go in and attack Assad. So he's got no motivation for using chemical weapons, and he's not that stupid. He's quite a bright man, is Assad. So this is just another regime change war. We're used to them by now, aren't we? We're used to being lied to about them. We can see that with the Chilcot report, and hopefully there was a report out today that Tony Blair might get prosecuted for war crimes. It would be a wonderful thing. So Jeremy Corbyn knows this. We'll have a little listen to him now and his take on it.
I'd say we don't need unilateral action. We need to work through the UN, but above all, we need to bend ourselves totally to getting a political settlement in Syria and allow the inspectors space to work, allow them to make sure we know who did that terrible chemical weapons attack, and also recognise that the inspectors there are already destroying any stocks of chemical weapons that they find. The issue has to be finding a political solution so that the millions who've been forced to flee from Syria are able to return home, and the people of Syria are able to look forward to a future. It's not easy, I understand, but there has to be a political solution. That is what we should be looking for.
So let's be quite clear, this is a war on Syria. It's not a civil war by any means. It's only called a civil war by the mainstream media in the West. Assad's actually very popular amongst his own people. Not all of them, of course, but the vast majority of them. And he has so much support amongst his own people. That's why we found it difficult to knock him over. It wasn't quite the same with Gaddafi in Libya. He didn't quite have the support amongst his people that Assad's got. And we can see that the BBC has been putting out shocking propaganda. about Syria. They even changed some audio on one of their video clips to make it more of a chemical weapons attack. And the other Western narrative about this is that the millions that have fled Syria, the refugees, the Western narrative is that they're running away from the dictator Assad. But we can actually see now that Assad's forces are making so much ground, as they liberate cities and towns and villages, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees are actually going back home, and they're going back to these to their own hometowns. So again, this is us, really. This is, when I say us, I mean the West. This is the US, Britain, France and Israel. We're the biggest warmongers in the world. So we're fomenting this war against Assad, and of course it's about oil. It's about oil pipelines. The same thing, really. Interestingly, oil's been discovered off of the Syrian coast now. There's oil in the Golan Heights. Now, the Golan Heights are a part of Syria that were occupied by Israel in the 1967 war. So since 1967, Israel had been illegally occupying the Golan Heights, and there's oil there. And the Israelis have now started issuing licenses to the Western oil companies to go and drill for oil in the Golan Heights, even though it's not their land. But, you know, even though international law says that's wrong, nobody seems to be willing to do anything about it. And we see Turkey. Turkey's a NATO member, one of our allies. And we can see since 2011, since this war started in Syria, we can see that Turkey, NATO ally, have been allowing Al-Qaeda and Syrian fighters to cross their border with impunity. They just come and go as they please, it would seem. And also Turkey, when ISIS take over Syrian oil fields, they've then been selling that oil onto the international market, and they've been doing that through Turkey as well. We can also see that the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and Qatar in particular, they've been funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They're supposed to be our allies as well, but that's how come these rebel groups can afford all these guns and all those nice new Toyotas. And also, very recently, we've also seen, as Assad's forces make so much progress in kicking ISIS and Al-Qaeda out, we've seen both the Israelis and the Americans bombing Assad's forces, which seem designed to give ISIS and Al-Qaeda advantages on the ground. So we're supposed to be there to fight Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and yet we're not. We're helping them in many ways. This war is very much against Assad and not against ISIS and Al-Qaeda, as is the stated aim. And of course, we don't want this war to end. Or if we do, we don't want it to be Assad, and there's nobody to take over from Assad. So what the plan is really, and this was the plan in Iraq as well, although it didn't work out that way, but we want to break these countries up into small little statelets so that we can put in our own puppet governments, so we can get the oil free, so we can run pipelines across them if we want to, and if those pipelines burst and pollute, that's okay. So, you know, this is just another regime change war. I'm sure you're used to them by now. And they've been sold to you with lies and propaganda, just like Iraq and Libya have. And I'm hoping that the British population is much wiser to this now. I think everybody's a bit more savvy. I think the people who've been following, who've come on board with Corbyn, they've been watching the mainstream media. They now know how the mainstream media lies, because they've seen the lies against Corbyn. So believe me when I tell you that this war on Syria has been sold to you. It has been sold to you with lies and propaganda. It's as simple as that. So let's have a look at the people who are doing this. So, you know, these people who are willing to kill civilians to steal their oil and build pipelines, they're sociopaths. They're sociopaths. And we've had a good glimpse of sociopaths in Britain fairly recently. Sociopaths are the same people who clad Grenfell Tower in inflammable materials so they can save literally a few pounds. You know, I think it was £5,000 it would have cost to use the fireproof materials rather than the flammable ones. They're the sociopaths who want to sell off the NHS to their rich friends rather than having a free health service. And they're the people who won't give the nurses and the firemen a pay rise. And what we have to understand is that the only reason they treat us as well as they do is because they need our votes, of course. And unfortunately for the people of Syria, they don't vote in our elections. But we can see with the rise of Corbyn now, even though Corbyn didn't win the election, we can see with just him there nipping at their heels, we can see the Tories, we can see them backing down from the austerity programme already. We can see them re-evaluating the pay caps on the social workers' pay caps. And we need to defeat these people. And with Corbyn, we've come a very long way towards defeating these people in the last few months. And do believe me that if we manage to stop our parliament bombing Assad, which might very well stop the Americans doing it, that's another very, very big leap to defeating these sociopaths.